Hello, and welcome to a video breaking down the 2025-2026 potential public forum debate resolutions. My name is Jet Smith, and I'm the head coach at Highland High School in Pocatello, Idaho. And hopefully this video will help you make an informed decision whenever it's time to come and vote for topics again in public forum debate all season long. So what are we going to do in this video? First, we're going to examine the 15 questions that I'll be looking at each topic through. Then we're going to go through 12 different resolutions from the 6 cycles that we debate in public forum. First, we'll look at the September-October 2025 topics, which are about the European Union. Then we'll look at November and December in 2025, which is about government power. Then in January 2026, it'll be international economics. Then in February of 2026, we'll look at government regulations of potentially harmful freedoms. In March of 2026, the topic will be about single-family housing. In April of 2026, the topic will be about federal power. And we won't talk about the Nationals topics because at the time of posting this video, they have not been released. Usually the Nationals topics are not released until April of the year before Nationals so that they can make sure that they write them around something that is highly relevant to current events and to avoid giving too much time to prepare for Nationals to maintain competitive equity. Then I'll go over my final thoughts on the topics. And my recommendations for what I would vote for and for what I hope that future topic committees do in terms of continuing the successes of these topics as well as improving upon some of their weak points. So first of all, who am I and why bother to listen to me? I competed for 3 years in high school and 2.5 years in college. I mostly did policy debate in Idaho, but I also did World Schools debate at the national tournament twice. But I dabbled in public forum in Lincoln Douglas. My novice year was in public forum. I then assistant coached at Rigby High School for 2 years. I'm also the head coach for speech and debate at Highland High School in Pocatello, Idaho, and I'm starting my 6th year head coaching at Highland and my 8th year coaching in general in the upcoming season. I'm also the coach of the 2021 and 2022 state championship runner-ups in public forum, the number 1 seed going into elimination rounds at the 2023 Idaho State Debate Championships. I've also coached 5 public forum teams to qualify for nationals over the past 5 years. And I helped assistant coach teams when I was assistant coaching to round 11 and 14 overall 7th place in 2019 in public forum as well. Outside of public forum, I've also coached the 2022 Big Questions Debate National Runner-Up and the 2025 World Schools Debate National Runner-Ups and a quarterfinalist team. So I assure you, while I might not be the number 1 public forum debater in the world, I think that my opinions are worth listening to. So what are we going to look at these topics through? There are 15 overall questions or areas that I want to examine when we are looking at these topics. The first one is the commonality or use of similar topics in the past, such as, is the resolution going to produce repetitive debates due to its similarity to a topic that was released within the same season or the past 3 years? Second, we'll look at the length and simplicity of the topic's wording. How many words long is the topic? Because usually if it's longer than 12 words or so, it's not getting picked unless they're both equally longer, and shorter than 5 words is pretty rare for public forum. Third, we'll look at the topic area of what broad subject area does it fall into. Usually it's one of these 15. You can pause and read those. Fourth, is it a policy topic, a value topic, a fact topic, or a mixture? Is the topic phrased as an action or a policy, or an evaluative or a judgment, or a comparative or a determination of truth? Spoiler alert, 11 of the 12 topics are policy topics, although some of them are more policy debate-y than others. Fifth, we'll look at how easy they are to understand at a first glance. Is it simple enough to understand that coaches and students will not need to already be an expert on the topic area, or that they won't need to immediately look something up to just know what the topic is about to make an informed decision about what to vote for? 6, we'll look at the difficulty in researching the topic. So we'll ask, is there plenty of recent, relevant, easy to access, and high quality information being put out there about the topic area in the news, from academic institutions, and from government or think tank reports? We'll also examine the current cultural relevance of each of the topics. Is it something currently being discussed by average and above average intelligence level members of the general public, politicians, the news, pop culture? 8th, we'll look at, is it novice friendly or would it appeal to the interests of the average youth? Is the topic something that's easy and fun for freshmen to think about, see relevance to their daily life, and avoid making new students feel uncomfortable? 9th, we'll look at the political connotations, or how liberal, conservative, radical, or moderate something is. Is it partisan? Does it have strong connection to those partisan politics? Is either side super aligned to one political party? Is it moderate or radical in its action? 10th, we'll look at how educationally valuable the topics are. Mostly, does the topic require or incentivize students to learn about something that they probably otherwise won't be taught about in schools, or that they'll be misled about, or that they'll only be given a one-sided understanding of in education, in the home, in the local news, to make them hopefully more well-rounded and well-informed members of society. Then we'll examine the pro versus con bias. Does the topic seem to skew towards one side of the topic or the other in terms of quantity or quality of argumentation, research responses, and like gut check truth appeal to the general public or lay judges? 12th, how big is the topic overall? Does the topic cover a relatively simple controversy with only a few viable arguments on each side, or is the topic really broad with a litany of issues and arguments that could be made for each side of the resolution? 13th, how friendly is it to traditional debate and lay judges? Does the resolution encourage or discourage, allow or require you to stray away from traditional strategies towards overly complicated or hyperbolic impacts, or discuss issues that are really difficult to break down in a 4-minute speech? 14th, friendliness to progressive and circuit debate. Does the topic encourage or discourage, allow or require debaters on either side to make alternative solution arguments, critique-based arguments, things like that? And lastly, we'll talk about the current reaction or the community bias that is or likely will going to happen in response to these topics. Does the topic deal with issues that coaches, students, judges, schools, parents, etc. are historically not a fan of talking about, or are worried about offending or upsetting audience members and peers if they have to discuss them in a debate round or in the classroom? What are people on social media and debate camps saying about the topic? So for each of the topics that we're going to examine in this video, we're going to go through each of these 15 questions or issue areas so that you know as much as you can about the topic itself, not as much the arguments on the topic itself, to make an informed decision. We will also, at the end of these 15 questions, go over 5 to 10 pro and 5 to 10 con arguments that I've garnered from the literature base, and we'll also talk about what I think is going to win and what I hope is going to win for each of these topic cycles. So before we get into the first topic area, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you like this video or other videos on my channel, you should definitely stick around because I'll be analyzing the 6 topics from this list that end up getting chosen. Other videos that I'm hoping to release this summer include videos about how to write a great oratory, approaching prepared and impromptu topics in world schools debate, how to flow no matter what type of debate event that you do, and how to write a great informative speech as well. And if there's other things that you would like me to do videos on during the summer or throughout the year, please let me know in the comments. So we'll begin by discussing the very first topic cycle, which is for September-October, and that is about the European Union. So in order to understand either topic, we first have to know what the European Union is. It is a collective of 27 member states that pool their sovereignty for collective economic, social, and physical security. It is made up of a bunch of different things, and the security policy, which is most relevant to the first topic, is called the Common Foreign and Security Policy, and the Central European, or the European Central Bank, is the part that's probably the most relevant to the UK joining the EU, although every single branch will likely have to be involved in that. So the first topic option that you might debate is that the European Union should establish a nuclear sharing agreement with France to create an independent deterrent capability. You can watch a really good panel discussion sort of topic lecture from the Argument Institute if you click on the link in this video, and I'll post the slides in the comments down below. And I'm sure that because this is the topic that most camps are picking, there will be other future topic lecture videos that I can link as well. The nuclear sharing agreement part of the topic is the idea that a country that has nuclear weapons agrees to house or contain or keep some of their nuclear weapons in a non-nuclear armed allied nation for the sake of deterring aggression against those allies, giving those allies a voice and share of the rights or responsibilities of the nuclear strategy, and discouraging those allies from building nuclear weapons of their own. Additionally, the independent deterrent capability essentially gives us a purpose for the express goal of this policy for the pro, which is the ability of a country to scare or threaten potential enemies from attacking or engaging in other aggressive acts against that country, regardless of how the potential enemies feel about the country's commitments for defense from allies. In other words, we want to make sure that even though a certain country might not have nuclear weapons of their own, if they're in the EU, countries should be afraid of attacking them because France's nuclear deterrent capability is enough for that one country to be just as scary as if you were going to attack France themselves. The other option that might get debated this topic cycle is that the United Kingdom should rejoin the European Union. Now, what would this mean? In order to join the European Union, you're going to look at Article 49 of the treaty, essentially, that established the European Union. You would have to hold a referendum of citizens in the UK to vote to want to rejoin, and you'd probably have to have above 60% wanting to rejoin for a period of years. Then the United Kingdom would apply for membership in the European Union under Article 49. That would then have to be approved unanimously by the European Council, and Britain would then have to agree to follow the EU's rules, like adopting the euro, opening up immigration to European Union citizens, and not getting a rebate on their budget, all of which are things that they used to not have to comply with when they were part of the EU, but when they formed the EU, they basically gave themselves certain exceptions, and those exceptions would no longer be granted to them if they rejoined now. So let's jump into what topics have we debated that are similar to these in the past. First, the European Union should establish a nuclear sharing agreement with France to create an independent deterrent capability. There have been plenty of topics in LD about nuclear weapons, and there might even be one this season later on in January, February of 2026. There was also a college policy debate topic about nuclear weapons in the United States from 2023 to 2024. But in terms of similar topics, you have November, December 2020, the United States should adopt a declaratory nuclear policy of no first use. In LD of 2020, we debated states ought to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. And then in 2013, there was a topic, unilateral military force by the United States is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. So while yes, the topic is similar because it's about nukes, the idea of nuclear sharing from a non-US country to another US country has never really been debated before as part of the NSDA. The other option is the United Kingdom should rejoin the European Union. And while we've had lots of topics about trade, immigration, and membership in international organizations, a country joining the EU has not really been part of what we've debated in the past in the NSDA. In Nationals of 2024, we did debate whether or not we should, as the United States, trade more with the European Union. And we've debated about open borders or the EU working with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. So like I said, we've debated the EU before, but UK membership in the EU, while it was a very common extemporaneous speaking topic back in the late 2010s, it wasn't really ever a debate topic, maybe something brought up on certain debate topics. So what about the wording simplicity or length? Now, the first topic is the nuclear sharing one, and it is quite above average in terms of its length, 17 words. It also specifies two actors, as the European Union and France, essentially, both having to work together. And it also has a very specific purpose for deterrence, which a lot of the times, unless you're debating in Congress where there's a to do blah, blah, blah clause at the end of the title, we don't really put the purposes of the plans in our policy topics usually. Whereas the rejoining the EU topic is pretty short. It's only 8 words long. The wording is really simple, but most Americans don't know what would change or what it would mean for the UK to rejoin the EU. Both of these topics are about international relations and institutions, but the nuclear sharing one is also about military and security, and the European Union one is about economics and trade. They're both policy or action topics, and if you look at the nuclear sharing one at first glance, it seems really complicated, and then it seems simple, and then it gets complicated again. Is France going to just house their nuclear weapons there, give up full control, just make it easier to launch from there? Are they going to make all the decisions together or still unilaterally? So it's kind of simple, kind of complicated. Whereas the European Union topic looks really simple, but again, most people have no idea how rejoining the EU would work, what it would entail, what would actually change, and all of the steps and processes that would have to happen post voting for the pro. So what about researching? Well, I would say the nuclear sharing agreement is decently easy to research, but most of the research is in the context of NATO nuclear sharing and about the UK and or France nuclear sharing. There is some recent news about this from April to May of 2025, whereas rejoining the EU is harder to research because there's not very much evidence of people actually suggesting that the UK rejoins the EU. There's a couple of opinion polls that say that about 57% of people in some polls want to rejoin, but there's not really any evidence suggesting or even that it's possible or desirable that they rejoin within less than 10 years. There is evidence about how we should increase ties with the EU, but I think that evidence could go con in terms of a counterplan. So what about cultural relevance? Well, unfortunately, thanks to Donald Trump, Russia and Israel and Iran and China, the nuclear sharing agreement is relevant because the world is highly unstable and everyone wants a little bit more assurances. It's not super culturally relevant because no party or politician is pushing for rejoining the UK or the EU as the UK really, and it's not very relevant to the US almost at all. In terms of youth appeal, I think most American teenagers aren't going to care about either of these topics, but some kids are going to find talking about nuclear weapons and alliances cool. And I think American teenagers kind of have beef with Britain for some reason. So I see there being a lot of jokes or insensitive stuff or making fun of British people happening. Maybe they'll like the UK topic more because of that. How about partisanness or controversial? Neither of these topics is super partisan or controversial, like in terms of left right bias or American Democrat or Republican lay judges. However, I would say that it's probably going to be based in some anti-Trump arguments for the pro on nuclear sharing, like EU wants more reassurance from France because they're not feeling reassured by Donald Trump. So maybe that makes the pro a little bit more liberal, but also spreading nuclear weapons is not, always a leftist thing. So it's kind of left, kind of not. And I guess more left-leaning parties are looking to rejoin the EU, and more right-leaning parties are looking to not rejoin the EU in the UK itself. In terms of educational value, I think that both of these are valuable. You'll learn a lot about different countries in the European Union. You'll learn about international tensions. You'll learn about the US's actions and commitments. Or you'll learn more about how the EU works and what it does and what Brexit did to the UK. I don't think it's as educationally relevant to US students as the France nuclear sharing option is, but they're both educational at least. How about bias? I would say that both of these topics are biased towards the con, but I think that the nuclear sharing topic is less biased. The topic wording doesn't really match the real literature for the pro. Like, no one's really actually advocating for like a full-on nuclear sharing agreement. The president has been kind of like misquoted and misinterpreted. But there are people worried about it who are saying that we shouldn't do it. So I think that there's decent pro evidence-ish, not quite the exact like wording. But for rejoining the EU, it's very neg biased. It's not popular enough with the EU or the UK to justify it. It would be really difficult to implement, and rejoining wouldn't even go back to the way things were before, and they weren't perfect or great when the UK was part of the EU. So I think that it's pretty hard to be con on the rejoin EU topic. Or it's pretty hard to be pro on the EU topic. How big the topics are, I think that the pro can really only talk about arguments that stem from a desire for greater deterrence. So the pro is really limited on the France nuke sharing in some ways. And there's a lot of con ground based on each individual country that could take the nuclear weapons, most likely Poland or Germany. And then in terms of how big the EU rejoining topic is, it's pretty small. There's not a lot of literature. Most of the debate is just going to be about, does the UK have better relationships inside or outside of the EU? And are those better relationships worth any potential losses of sovereignty? How traditional debate or lay friendly are these topics? I think that the first topic likely discusses nuclear war, which can be difficult for traditional coaches and debaters and lay judges. And a lot of the arguments are about signaling or perception as a reaction to the topic, which can be difficult to explain in a 4-minute speech. Whereas the rejoining topic, I think it'd be hard to explain what's happening now, what would change, how it would happen, and still have enough time to like make reasons why we should in 4 minutes. So I think both of these are pretty difficult for lay judges, if I'm being honest, so not great for the first topic cycle of the year. How progressive debate friendly are they? I don't think that the implementation is super obvious or clear on the nuclear sharing topic, so the pro could maybe have a little bit of room to specify. There's decent alternative option solvency evidence for the negative, and there's pretty good critique literature on both sides for nuclear weapons. Whereas the EU topic is, again, pretty limited. The rejoining process is very explicit, and there wouldn't be a lot of wiggle room for like flexibility on the pro. There's decent counterplan ground-ish, like alternative solvency option ground for the con. The capitalism critique could work for the con on the topic, but other than that, not great critique literature. And then how is the community going to feel? Well, overwhelmingly, the community seems to have endorsed, or at least the part of the community that cares about debate during the summer and is, going to camps and things like that, are pretty much overwhelmingly pushing for the France nuclear sharing option. Kids in camps want it really bad. And I haven't really seen anyone excited or wanting the EU rejoining topic. There's some people saying it wouldn't be that bad online. I think it's a little bit more novice friendly and a little bit more simple, and it doesn't require nuclear weapons or war arguments, so it will be popular with some people for that reason. So what are some argument ideas on both sides of the topic? The pro could make these arguments that we should have the France enter into a nuclear sharing agreement with the European Union because America is unreliable, Russia is a bigger and bigger threat, it would give the EU greater autonomy, it would strengthen NATO, it would improve France's foreign relations, it would increase uncertainty of adversaries before launching an attack, it would enhance burden sharing, it would improve interoperability, it would deter European proliferation, and it would protect nuclear arsenals because they're spread out. Whereas the con could argue that France should not enter into a nuclear sharing agreement because it would infringe on French sovereignty, it would violate treaties or agreements, it would result in domestic political consequences for Macron and the leading party, it would upset members of the EU or fracture the EU alliance, probably it would provoke Russian aggression and make them upset, maybe even China's aggression. It would probably decrease America's commitment to Europe or embolden Trump to decrease its commitment. It would increase arms races of nuclear and other types of weapons. The host country that accepts the nuclear weapons from France could have domestic political consequences. It's very expensive to enter into nuclear sharing agreements. And it would perhaps weaken France's ability to deter threats at home. What about the UK rejoining the EU topic? Again, 10 arguments for both sides that I've seen or come up with based on my research. Pro would say that it would increase trade, increase foreign direct investment, restore freedom of movement, restore power to shape EU policies, improve collective security assurance, increase funding for research and innovation. It would appease the UK public desires and discourage civil unrest. It would simplify relations with the Republic of Ireland. It would improve regulations of key industries, and it would benefit the euro currency. Whereas reasons the UK should not rejoin the European Union would include the loss of UK sovereignty, increased financial burdens on the UK, the loss of the UK currency system, increased immigration concerns, the negotiation process would be costly, it would result in political consequences at the UK for different political parties involved, possibly it would result in a second Brexit in the future, it would be better to just improve EU-UK relations, it would violate the will of the UK public, and the EU is a failing institution, so the UK shouldn't want to be part of it. Now, what do I think is going to win out of these two topics? I think that France nuclear sharing is going to win because the debate camps picked it, and that usually has a pretty big impact on which topics get picked in PF in September and October. I think that it's more interesting than the European or rejoining the EU topic, and I think that it's more feasible and likely and realistic to happen in the real world than rejoining the European Union is. Like, the topic itself is just more possible, so more people will treat it seriously and write articles about it. But I still think that a lot of people are going to vote for the UK rejoining the EU topic because it is simpler, it has a shorter wording, it's not about nuclear weapons or nuclear war, and a lot of coaches have fond memories of coaching about Brexit and extemp, so they might, have more familiarity with that topic. So I'm going to give France nuclear sharing about 57% odds of getting picked, but I won't be shocked if the rejoining the EU topic gets picked. I hope that the France nuclear sharing topic wins, because while I think that both topics should be better rooted in actual literature, I think it's way harder to be pro on the UK rejoining the EU than it is to be pro on the nuclear sharing topic, even though both of them are con biased. I also think that the education that we gain from the first topic is more relevant and valuable and unique than just rejoining the EU. So I don't love either of these topics, but I would give nuclear sharing a 7 out of 10 and the UK rejoining the EU a 6 out of 10. So now let's talk about the second topic cycle, which is November-December, which is a topic about government power. The first option of what we might debate is resolved state governments in the United States should end all judicial elections. Judicial elections are when a candidate for a spot on state appellate or state Supreme Courts appears on a ballot during an election with the candidate of the largest share of the popular vote getting the vacant seat on the court. It can be partisan elections, which is you run as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or a libertarian, or it can be a non-partisan election where you don't know what political party people are from on the ballot itself. Ending all judicial elections would look like affecting about 50% of states that currently have some sort of election system for at least some of their judges or justices on state courts. Those courts would then have to move to an executive, the governor, or legislative, which is the state Congress, appointing or nominating and approving and confirming the justices. Or they could go to a judicial nominating commission system where the governor or the legislature picks a group of lawyers and current judges and things like that to basically not like process applications and nominate people and things like that. But basically, it would say that representatives that we voted for would pick the justices, kind of like how it works at the federal level, rather than an election. This topic could be implemented via a governors association, or just pretend like for some reason all state governments unanimously decided to do the exact same thing, or decided to end all judicial elections at the exact same time, but maybe each state replaces it with a different system. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a uniform replacement, but it has to be uniform ending. The second option for this topic cycle is the United States federal government should require technology companies to provide lawful access to encrypted communications. Now, encrypted communications is the digital exchange of information that is transmitted as unreadable text that is only encodable and decodable by keys. It is intended to maintain the privacy, security, and secrecy of sensitive data and information from hackers, the public, the government, etc., and only people on the ends of the communication, so the person who sends the message and the person intended to receive the message, not the internet company or the media app or the cell tower or whatever it is supposed to be able to essentially see what the communication is. Only the people who the message was written by or intended for would have the keys to see the encrypted communication, unless we vote pro. Now, what would it mean to provide lawful access to the government for these encrypted communications that they are currently not able to see because they don't have a key? This has been referred to as a quote-unquote golden key or backdoor access given to the government with a court-approved warrant. In the same way that the government shouldn't just be able to enter your home without a warrant, it would say they can't enter your encrypted communication without a warrant. It would be getting rid of warrant-proof encryption promises or policies from private companies. So, what topics have we debated that are similar to these? Beginning with state governments in the United States should end all judicial elections. It's important to note that this is the very first time, I believe, that state governments have ever possibly been the specified actor of a resolution, so that's pretty cool. The justices of the Supreme Court of the United States ought to be term limited was debated in March and April of 2023, and we'll have some crossover arguments about judicial integrity. In 2013, there was a debate about a Supreme Court case over spending in elections, which is relevant because it was a court case and also because spending in elections in state judicial elections is kind of getting out of control. In 2005 in LD, they debated judicial activism is necessary to protect the rights of American citizens, and there are arguments about judicial activism on both sides of this topic. And then in 2003, they debated term limits for judges elected in their district rather than appointed by the president for a life term. So we've gotten to similar argumentation before, but we've never had a topic that quite was like this one before. The other option is the United States federal government should require technology companies to provide lawful access to encrypted communications. In 2017 and 2014, the national topic for LD was more of like a principle boiled down version of this topic. So a just government ought to prioritize civil liberties over national security, or the United States ought to prioritize the pursuit of national security objectives above the digital privacy of its citizens. So anytime that we debated about privacy versus security, that's basically what this topic is, just in a specific instance. In 2013, we debated the benefits of domestic surveillance by the National Security Agency outweigh the harms in public forum. And then in 2003, the most perhaps similar topic was, in the U.S. judicial system, truth-seeking ought to take precedence over privileged communication. So that topic would be directly related to this one, although you'll be hard-pressed to find any online evidence from that era of people's cases. So what about the wording or simplicity of these topics? Well, the judicial elections one is pretty simple. It's about 11 words long. It's not clear what the replacement is for judicial elections going away, but other than that, it's a very easy topic to see and understand. Then we have the other topic is 16 words, which is above average, and it is also a lot of terms that are kind of unclear to non-experts. You might not know what lawful access is or encrypted communications is. You might be able to infer or guess, but many people won't, especially novices that are just now starting. So both of these topics are about democracy and governance and criminal justice, but the second topic is also about science and technology and human rights and individual freedoms. They're both policy topics, but the first one is using state governments for the first time, and maybe you can or maybe you can't specify what the replacement is. You can't read a plan in public forum, but we wouldn't just have no justices anymore in the 50% of states that have judicial elections. So there's probably going to be some sort of replacement. But maybe every state gets to choose it, or there's one kind of uniform standard that they adopt. Whereas the other topic is a policy topic with really specific wording, and there's not super a room for plans other than specifying how the warrant would be obtained for said lawful access. But I think that would probably just be a plan, so probably won't be allowed to do that. Just read it as an example. Both of these topics seem sort of either simple at the beginning and then get complicated, or vice versa. Every state judges judicial elections differently. So you're not really sure what you're getting if you end all of them. You don't even know what you're ending necessarily, because every judicial election in every state is different. Whereas the other topic seems really complicated, but it's actually really clear because of how specific it is. You just might not know what the different terms in the resolution means. How easy are these topics to research? There's lots of evidence about why the status quo is bad for judicial elections, but the wording of end all, there's not really anyone out there saying that. There's a handful of cards maybe that say that there shouldn't be judicial elections, but someone advocating that just like they should all stop being elected is not there. Most people are advocating for reforms or only saying that certain types of judicial elections should end. But there's lots of recent and historical evidence about the potential positives and consequences of judicial elections. Whereas the other topic, a lot of the evidence is from 2015 to 2020, and most pro evidence is from government sources, which is difficult to justify because, of course, the government is going to say that they need access to this. And a lot of the con evidence is also from technology companies trying to protect their corporate interests. There is some recent evidence, but not as much as I would like to see. Both topics are kind of relevant, but mostly not. There will be some judicial elections happening in certain states and localities in the fall, and the year after the November that this is being debated is midterms, so there will probably be some evidence coming out about people starting to run who will be elected in those midterm elections. The Elon Musk giving millions of dollars in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race makes this kind of relevant, whereas the other one, I guess the leaks of the signal chats proving that like even encrypted communications, if you're not careful or whatever, I guess, is kind of relevant. Quantum computers are being developed pretty rapidly, which is making encryption stronger in some ways and weaker in other ways. And we don't know what the world is going to look like come November. Maybe this will be more relevant. Maybe it will be less relevant. What about appeal to youth, novices, or young debaters? I don't think either of these is necessarily super relevant, but there are lots of kids who are going to be voting for the first time in November or in the midterms next year, so the first topic will be relevant to them. And I think a lot of teenagers care about their privacy and use digital communications, so maybe you can make the second topic relevant to them as well. How partisan are these? Neither of these are super partisan. Neither of them is very Republican or Democrat based. I've seen people on both sides of the political spectrum argue for and against both of these things, which is nice. In terms of educational value, I think that the fact that kids will likely be voters for many of our debaters in judicial elections or become lawyers who would argue in front of judges that are possibly elected or appointed makes the first topic relevant. I think the other one is also valuable because it helps people know what encryption is and their own personal privacy rights and responsibilities, and knowing about like what the government does and why they do it is valuable. I would say probably the judicial elections topic, the education is more portable or more relevant or useful. What about side skew? I think both of these topics lean towards the negative. And I think the first one is slightly towards the negative because the reform argument is probably stronger than end all judicial elections. But if you can convince the judge that voting con is voting for the status quo because it's public forum, then it's pretty easy for pro to win because the status quo is just like objectively terrible. Whereas I think the lawful access is heavily skewed towards the negative. There's very good defense against the pro, and the rights arguments and big shtick impacts arguments all favor the con. I think it's going to be very difficult to be pro if lawful access to encrypted communications gets picked. In terms of the size of these topics, both of them are not the biggest. I'd say that the judicial elections topic is small to like medium sized. Most arguments boil down to the same few issues about the quality of judges, the objectivity of judges' decisions, and should we reform or should we get rid of the elections entirely. Whereas the other topic is extremely small. Every pro argument is basically just that it either helps fight a specific crime or it helps in crime fighting in general. And every con argument is basically just it violates people's rights and it's logistically not possible. And both sides might talk about whether or not it helps or hurts big tech, which could be good or bad. I think that the first one is very lay friendly because the AF doesn't have to defend a replacement when you vote pro. The counter plans aren't really allowed because they would, also help pro because they're not part of public forum. So if you're in front of a lay judge or someone who won't ever listen to like an alternative option by the con, then it's also again easy to be pro. There's not huge overblown impact chains. It's not very partisan or like biased in the general public. The arguments are really simple. I do think that on encrypted communications, the arguments on both sides have good pathos. Defense is more winnable in front of lay judges, and which helps the con. And I think that what encryption is or how encryption works and trying to explain that, in addition to still making winning arguments, will be pretty difficult in a 4-minute speech when you have to talk slowly. Whereas for progressive debaters, I think that the AF can pick the replacement or has openness to like describing like what types of replacements they would likely endorse, which is good. There's good ground on like the reform counterplan / alternative solution. There's really big democracy or authoritarianism impacts, although I do think the link chains on that will be a little bit overblown. There's politics disadvantages for certain states. The critique ground is not great, though, on the judicial elections topic. Whereas I think that it's really hard to be AF in a progressive round on the lawful access topic because it's a hyper-specific resolution, but with bad solvency advocates. So what you're defending, you're not going to have very good evidence for. And the solvency evidence or the terminal defense evidence is really good on con. The counterplan ground isn't great for con. It's okay critique literature, I guess, on the AF, and there's decent critique literature on the neg. For the community bias or reaction to these topics, I think that most people won't be opposed to the judicial elections topic, but some people will be concerned about the fact that you're only ending something and not specifying a replacement. Whereas the lawful communications or access to encrypted communications topic, people online in certain polls are saying that they want to see this more, but nobody's really saying why. And I think that traditional debaters won't like how extremely policy topic this topic seems and is. So what can you say if you're on the pro on the ending state judicial elections topic? Here are 10 ideas for the pro side of why we should end them. Judges care more about getting reelected than the law. There's too much spending on judicial elections. Commissions or appointments result in better quality judges. We can increase the amount of objective punishments by judges because right now there's evidence that says that judges looking to get reelected are way harsher in their sentencing. You will deal with the issue of misinformed, uninformed, and ignorant voters. The judiciary is politicized more when we have elections for them. We divert focus away from judging towards campaigning when there's elections. We decrease the cooperation or collegiality between judges, which is a reason to end the elections. You can gerrymander just like any other type of race, which is bad, and it leads to justice differing from state to state or even from locale to locale because of whatever political party is in control determines what the judges want. So, whereas the con arguments are the reasons why we should not end the judicial elections in state governments, are that the elections make the judicial branch more diverse. It makes the branch more dependent from the legislative or executive. It allows for effective term limits for judges. It increases accountability for judges. The public trusts and has better faith in judiciary when there's elections for them. Reforming the election system of spending or campaigning is better than ending them. We should only ban state Supreme Court elections. You would hurt voter turnout because people who care about those elections but nothing else wouldn't show up. You would make regional representation or making sure that judges are from all over the state and not just like the biggest cities would be harmed. And it's better to reform the voting or ballot process of judicial elections rather than ending them entirely. Whereas if you're on the encrypted communications topic, based on my research, I could only really get 8 arguments so far for each side. The pro will talk about things like helping fight child porn if the government can access encrypted communications, helping fight terrorism, helping fight human trafficking, holding technology companies accountable, improving quality of evidence in investigations, making officers safer in investigations, improving cross-border international law enforcement, and deterring criminal activity. The con, on the other hand, has arguments about why we should not give the government access to encrypted communications, such as violating privacy rights, opening up the door to hackers, pushing criminals or terrorists to their own encryption technologies, not from companies. American tech companies could be cost billions of dollars. Governments won't safeguard the information that they access. It will chill free speech or discourage people from speaking their mind. There will be a disproportionate impact on marginalized groups, or that it will stifle the innovation of developing encryption technologies because the government's going to be able to see it no matter what. So, What do I think should win? I think that, or what do I think will win and what should win? I think both answers is judicial elections. I think that judicial elections will win because it's more culturally relevant, it's the shorter wording of the topic choices, it's more novice friendly, and it doesn't require research to know what the debate is going to be about when you open up the ballot the night before that it's due and coaches just kind of pick something. I also think that even progressive debaters will like the flexibility of this topic more than the other one. Its slight vagueness gives more room for creativity. So I'm giving it about 60-40 odds. Whereas I also think that judicial elections should win because encryption is mega neg biased, and I think that encryption debates will always boil down to, is this even possible? Does it destroy encryption safety and rights versus deterring crime? And so I think the debates will get very boring and very repetitive very quickly for a 2-month-long topic. I would give the judicial elections topic a 9 out of 10 and the encrypted communications topic a 7 out of 10. So next, let's look at the third topic cycle, which is January 2026 on international economics. The first option is the People's Republic of China should substantially reduce its international extraction of natural resources. What is the extraction of natural resources? It is when you withdraw valuable materials from the environment for human use, like minerals, fossil fuels, timber, water, and food. So where is China doing that internationally? There are a lot of different regions that it happens. In each region, they do different things. There's international extraction done by China in African countries, in Southeast Asia, in Oceania or the Pacific, in Southern America, and the Arctic, Greenland, and Iceland. There's probably other places too, but these are the biggest ones that I could come up with and found in my immediate research. The other option of what we could debate this month is the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area outweigh the harms. So what is this? Because most of us have probably not heard of this. It is the second largest free trade area in the world. It spans 1.3 billion people. It has 54 out of 55 African Union members that have signed the agreement, although Eritrea has not signed it. But 48 of those 55 have ratified the agreement after signing it, basically agreeing to actually be bound by its terms as of January 2025. The focus of the free trade area is commitments to reduce or eliminate up to 97% of tariffs, reduce non-tariff barriers to trade within African countries to other countries within Africa, to create jobs, to raise wages, to enable investment, to foster industrialization. Other goals include making African nations more competitive on a global stage, boosting agricultural development and food security, promoting sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, and it has 6 different protocols or agreements. So it might sound very pro-biased right now, but these are just all of like the goals or justifications for the existence of the free trade area or the hypothetical reasons why it was originally created. It was signed pretty recently and has only been coming into effect and making a difference in the last few years. So it's less than 10 years old, I believe. So what are the similar topics to these that have been debated in the past? Well, the China topic, I debated a topic about in policy debate about China back in the 2016 to 2017 school year, I want to say. Or possibly the 2016 to 2017 school year. But in 2023, we debated about the extraction of fossil fuels from federal public lands and waters, which is relevant to this. And in 2022, November, December, this year's seniors might remember a topic from their novice year about how the People's Republic of China ought to prioritize environmental protection over economic growth, which is kind of like the LD wording of this topic, essentially. In 2014, we also debated developing countries should prioritize environmental protection over resource extraction when the two are in conflict. The other topic about the African Continental Free Trade Area has some topics that are kind of similar because they're either about free trade or they're about countries in Africa, but we've never debated anything specifically about this group before. So January of this year, we debated the African Union should grant diplomatic recognition to the Republic of Somaliland as an independent state. February 2021, on balance, the benefits of urbanization in West Africa outweigh the harms, which is kind of relevant to this one because you could argue that the ACFTA has contributed to that urbanization. In 2018, the Nationals topic was about NAFTA, which is kind of like the North American version of this free trade group. And then in February of 2015, there was a topic about economic globalization and benefiting worldwide poverty reduction. And some see the ACFTA as an example of globalization. So, what about the simplicity of the wordings of these topics? Well, the first topic is about 14 words, above average in length slightly, but it's pretty easy to understand, except it's really vague and it covers a lot of different things. Whereas the African Continental Free Trade Area topic is 12 words long on average. People can guess what it is, but they've probably never heard of it or done any specific research on it. Now, the topic areas, both of these are about international relations and institutions. Both of them are about economics, business, and trade. Both of them are about specific regions, but the first topic is also about the environment. Now, the China topic is very policy debate. It literally seems like it could be a year-long policy debate topic. And the other topic is the only evaluative and comparative topic of the entire year. It's the only benefits versus harms topic, which is weird when I'd say we've had at least a few of those or similar wordings of those every other year in public forum for like the past 3 or 4. So when you first look at these topics, people might have a vague idea of what China's international extraction of resources looks like, but they won't know any specifics. And coaches maybe will understand the African Continental Free Trade Area because they've debated about free trade before, but they won't know anything specific about what the area is doing or how successful it's been. So how about easiness of researching? I think the China topic is hard to research, not because there isn't any cards out there, but because the wording of the topic will not help you do research. If you Google the topic itself, you're not going to find great articles because nobody is using the phrasing of this topic in the actual literature. No one is saying substantially reduce its international extraction of natural resources. Even if you search international extraction of natural resources in quotes and then add China somewhere, you're barely going to find anything. There are lots of examples of China extracting natural resources in international territories or having companies that go in and work with or investing in companies that do it, but the wording of the topic is not in the literature and it's an extremely broad overall subject area. So if there's nothing specific, you have to use the broad stuff and connect it, but there's so much broad stuff that it's huge. I think that it's much easier, on the other hand, to research the African Continental Free Trade Area topic. You just need to get cards from 2021 and later at the earliest to make sure that it's about the actual effects of the free trade area and not like the hypothetical proposed benefits of it. Now, in terms of cultural relevance, Trump wanting Greenland and being upset about Panama because of China, both of those are because of China, makes this kind of relevant, I guess. Like, Trump is worried about China gaining access to all of the rare minerals in Greenland and global trade and environmental stuff in Panama. So that's kind of relevant for this reason, but who knows what it will be in 6 months from now. And then the other topic is more relevant, unfortunately, because of the travel ban affecting several countries on the African continent and tariffs affecting pretty much every country on the African continent. But there's not a lot of news or development specifically about like US-Africa relations right now, or even just in the news right now, there's not a lot of stuff about the African Continental Free Trade Area. How about youth appeal? I don't think either of these is very interesting to youth or novices. The first one might be more interesting to like climate activist kids, and kids might be more curious about the second topic because they probably don't know anything about it, and they haven't really learned a lot about like trade and things like that, let alone how horrible the US education system is at teaching kids about anything international, but particularly countries in Africa. I think that in terms of bias, the China topic might be biased for the pros half because most politicians, it feels like in the US, whether you're liberal or conservative, are on the China is a threat hate train. And the AF will be more liberal, I guess, because it will likely be about climate change and, environmental harm. So maybe the con is a little bit more conservative on the environment side, but the pro is more conservative, I guess, maybe on like the anti-China side. Whereas I don't think the African Continental Free Trade Area is very controversial. People don't really know a lot about it. The only thing that might happen is if you're making arguments about why tariffs are so bad and why we should get rid of them, or why tariffs are great, then you might be triggering or making people feel like their personal thoughts and opinions on like the Trump tariff situation are relevant to the debate. In terms of educational value, it's not that the first topic isn't valuable, but that it's so broad for only being debated for 1 month that I don't think that kids are going to have enough time to fully give this topic the amount of research that it deserves. And also the seniors who did LD as a novice will be getting very repetitive education. And they already hear a lot about why they shouldn't like China in school and in the news. So I'm not sure how useful this topic is for that. Whereas I do think the African Continental Free Trade Area kids are very unlikely to learn about it anywhere else, and it could help unlearn some harmful misconceptions about Africa as a continent and the countries within Africa. So what about skew or bias of these topics? I think the first one is very pro-biased because it is extremely difficult to find any pro-evidence that is objective and not just like, from China-sponsored media or from international extraction companies themselves. So it's very hard to find like non-biased, quote-unquote, con evidence. It's also really hard to find generic con evidence on this topic. The con evidence that does exist is almost always about like specific locations rather than China's international extraction in general. And I think that finding recent evidence is also very difficult for the con. The pro can be really specific in their defense of the topic. They can read like a 2 contention case about 2 specific places, or a 1 contention case about 1 specific place with 1 specific type of extraction that is really bad but really big and really common and really valuable, and the con case might not have anything to do with that. And even if the con case is true, the pro can say, okay, well, that specific benefit of international extraction, voting pro doesn't get rid of that, which the con doesn't have the same tools that it does in LD and policy to adapt to that. So I think that it's an extremely pro-biased topic. Whereas I think that the other topic is pretty pro-biased. If there were other options that were more equal, I'd probably be inclined to prefer those. Most articles that do exist about the AFCFTA are pro. Most of the studies that have been done about it go pro. And most con evidence and arguments is very defensive in nature. But there is strong defense, which means that in addition to the little offense that is available, the con can, because it is a benefits outweigh the harms, use the defense to mitigate the benefits, and then the harms can be enough to outweigh. How big are these topics? Well, the China topic is massive. They do so many different types of extraction in so many different places that both the pro and the con, in order to be fully prepared, are going to need an insane amount of prep. Whereas the African Continental Free Trade Area, I would say, is medium to small sized. Yes, there are 54 countries, only 48, ratifiers in the AFCFTA, but there's not a lot of like country specific, except for like the biggest countries, like evidence or specific partnerships within the AFCFTA. Most of the evidence is about the free trade area in general. So there's not as many specific scenarios that you have to prep, and any arguments about why free trade is good or bad will apply on this topic. You just can find specific examples of them. How about lay debate or traditional debate friendly? I do not think the first topic is traditional or lay debate friendly at all. The pros case will not make any sense if you aren't specific enough about your examples. But if you get too specific, you're going to get accused of having a plan, and there are a big lack of generic arguments that will make coherent sense on both sides of the topic. I think that the African Continental Free Trade Area topic, on the other hand, is very lay-friendly. It's the only non-policy topic of the whole year, so I think the traditional people will really want it. And lay judges, I think, being more willing to vote on like just defense than a lot of non-lay judges are, will help the con have more of a fighting chance in a lay round on that topic. What about progressive debate? I do think that the first topic is very progressive debate friendly. People who, if they love policy debate, but feel like they can't do it anymore, they'll be very happy with this topic most likely, and it will be the topic after winter break. So if they want to just hunker down and prep, then that will be great for them. But it's going to require a lot of work to be as fully prepared on this topic compared to pretty much any other PF topic that I've ever seen. There are so many different AFs, but there are not great counterplan grounds. And topicality is really bad in PF because of how short the times are. And I think there's decent critique ground on both sides at least. So if that's your thing, then good for you. Whereas on the African Continental Free Trade, I don't think that this topic is very progressive debate friendly. There's no real way to read plans or counterplans. The critique ground is okay at best on both sides, and there's a lot less strategic flexibility. What is the reaction to these topics? Well, I don't think that traditional PF debaters and coaches and judges are going to be very happy with the current slate of topics, especially when the most policy topic of the year, the China topic, is up against the only non-policy topic of the year. But the PF Discord thinks that this is getting 75%, it is getting 75% of the vote according to the current poll. So I think that the Prague people will really pull for this, but I think that like the silent majority, quote unquote, will really come out in favor against the other topic. I think that the African Continental Free Trade Area topic will be very popular with traditional debaters and coaches and get the vote rallied because of how upset people are about the lack of non-policy topics in PF. But progressive debaters will not be happy with this because after getting to debate 2 policy topics, going back to this will be difficult. What can the pro say on the China international extraction topic? Here are the ideas that I've come up with based on my research. Ending environmental degradation and pollution. They should substantially reduce the extraction because it will help end human rights violations of workers involved in the extraction. It will reduce economic dependency of these countries. It will reduce illegal and unregulated overfishing by China. It will help global food security be less disrupted. It will end the market manipulation by China. It will help curb climate change. It will enable economic diversification in the countries where the extraction is happening. It will increase resource conservation, and it will better support the local economies in the countries where the international extraction is occurring. The con, on the other hand, can say that China should not substantially reduce its international extraction of natural resources because doing so will harm renewable energy, that China lacks domestic alternatives, that it is a bad idea because it's currently boosting economic growth in whatever region the extraction is happening in. It will harm the global supply chain. It will result in job loss. It will have unfinished infrastructure wasting away because the projects will get abandoned. There will be violations of trade agreements or promises to allies if China substantially reduces this. Inflation might go up. It will just cause the US and EU to extract internationally more often and fill in. And it will make poverty a worse problem in China. So those are some con argument ideas. So now let's talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area topic. The pro can say that we want to, or that the benefits outweigh the harms because the benefits include increasing intra-African trade, increasing industrialization and economic diversification, reducing poverty, increasing wages, increasing foreign direct investment, empowering small and medium-sized enterprises, improving infrastructure, improving legal certainty and business confidence, improving human rights and social conditions, and improving political stability and security stability. Whereas the con can say that the harms outweigh the benefits because the AFCFTA disrupts and overlaps regional economic communities, that it increases inequality between the richest and poorest member countries, that it results in the overlooking of informal or unregistered enterprises, that it causes less revenue to be gained from tariffs or governance, which defund social services. Intra-African trade is more expensive than trading outside of the African continent, so it's encouraging trade that is worse. It harms local businesses by creating competition from neighboring countries. It increases intellectual property theft. It has increased corruption and bureaucracy. It has been bad for the environment, and it has worsened labor conditions. So what do I think is going to win? I'm pretty sure that African free trade is going to win. I think people are going to vote for it because it's the simpler, shorter wording of the topic. The traditional coaches and judges and students are really going to mobilize for this topic because it's their one chance to not debate a policy topic all year. And the China topic is really hard to research. So I think even progressive or like in between coaches and debaters will look into it and be like, this seems really tough to prep, especially when I know that February is the national qualifying tournament or the state championship tournament for a lot of people. So most people are focusing on prepping the February topic in January rather than the January topic itself. So having a super prep intensive January topic is not great. I think that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement probably has a 65% chance of getting picked. What do I hope is going to win? I also hope that it's that topic. I think that the China topic is even more pro-biased than that one is. I think African free trade is way more unique and novel in its education. You're not going to have a senior getting to reread cards from their freshman year. It's good to have a mixture of policy and non-policy topics, in my opinion, and I think that the China topic is huge and impossible to research. I would give the China resource extraction topic a 6 out of 10 and the AFCFTA topic a 8.5 out of 10. So now let's talk about February, which is a government regulation topic. So February 2026, the first option is resolved the Supreme Court should overturn District of Columbia v. Heller. Chances are most of you have never heard of this Supreme Court case unless you've already looked into it, so I'm going to explain it to you. Dick Heller, yes, that's his real name, was a cop in D.C. that was not allowed to have a gun at home for self-defense, despite being allowed to have one on his job, after he was denied a handgun permit based on a 1975 D.C. law that prohibited private ownership of handguns and required owned guns to be kept unloaded and disassembled. He sued, along with a couple of other people, and despite lower court rulings and about 100 plus years of previous court cases saying that DC was correct and they were allowed to have that ban because gun ownership was a right guaranteed only to the maintenance of a local militia, free, necessary to create a free state. The Supreme Court basically invented a interpretation of the Second Amendment that we all now think is just the only interpretation that's ever existed. They ruled that weapons in common use for lawful purposes count as arms under the Second Amendment, and that the right to bear arms applied to individual general members of the public, not just members of a well-regulated militia. So this was the dream, the goal of the NRA, essentially, for years and years and years and years. So what would it mean to overturn this case? Well, it means that cities and states would now be allowed to have laws banning handguns in the home and or requiring that any guns in the home be kept disassembled and unloaded. Those are the most obvious results. But to be honest, most laws probably aren't going to be affected because a lot of evidence out there says that the original decision didn't actually result in that many laws being changed. It could result in other cases, like the New York State Rifle Parent Association v. Bruin case being overturned, which is a case that basically said the individual right to bear arms also applies outside of the home. Or it could result in the overturning possibly of McDonald v. City of Chicago, which said that the Heller decision applied not just to like Washington, D.C. or the federal government, but also state and local governments can't have laws that restrict private hand ownership or handgun ownership in the home or require them to be unloaded or disassembled. It could also mean that cities and states can hypothetically require that a bunch of different things with guns happen, and maybe they won't get sued into oblivion, or maybe the Supreme Court will allow those laws to stand. That whereas right now, sometimes these laws are shut down by citing Heller, and sometimes they're not shut down by citing Heller. So it might help or it might not make a difference in terms of cities or states requiring that guns be cased in public or locked in a safe at home. Maybe it helps institute age limits for public carry, broader bans on assault weapons, mandated insurance, gun buybacks, and possession bans for felons or the mentally ill. So all of those things could happen. Cities and states could respond to the court case being overturned by trying to put in place those laws. But even if they do respond that way, it's still possible that those laws would have either A, already have been accepted in the status quo, or B, other laws could still result in those new laws being overturned. Or there could be a backlash that is so strong resulting from this Supreme Court case that the NRA and the right conservatives push for a new constitutional amendment to establish an individual right to bear arms. Because if the Supreme Court reinterprets the Second Amendment to only give the right to bear arms to a well-regulated militia, then they would essentially just write a new constitutional amendment that is their version of the Second Amendment that they always wanted. So the other option of what we might debate during this topic cycle is resolved the Federal Trade Commission should establish a federal regulatory framework for sports betting. What is that? Well, the Federal Trade Commission, the actor in this topic, is an independent government agency that was established by Congress designed to prevent anti-competitive, deceptive, and/or unfair business practices in order to protect consumers and promote competition. It also is in charge of enforcing consumer protection and antitrust laws a lot of the time. So the sports betting part of the topic is a form of gambling where people are wagering money on athletic competitions, both on the outcomes, like who's going to win or who's going to score the most, but also on individual player performances, right? So how many passes does someone get? How many points does someone score? 39 states have actually legalized this practice since a Supreme Court case in 2018 or 2020 of Murphy versus the National College Athletic Association, but the Federal Wire Act prevents interstate wagers. So basically, 39 states have legalized it, but you're not supposed to be able to gamble across state lines, although VPNs make that pretty easy. But that means that every single state has to regulate or regulates sports betting differently within their own state. So what would it mean to establish a federal regulatory framework? Great question. Again, not a term that's actually being used in the literature at all. So it could mean a lot of different things. Maybe it means that Congress passes a law via, like normal means or whatever, telling the FTC what to do, or the FTC, technically speaking, can regulate even without congressional approval. It just rarely does so. They would probably end up using Section 5A and Section 18 of the Federal Trade Commission Act to say that current sports betting practices are unfair and or deceptive. They could enforce new requirements by civil penalties, cease and desist orders, financial compensation for harmed consumers. But those are the punishments essentially for violating the regulations. What would those regulations look like? There are tons of different things that this could mean. It could mean we follow the same harmful requirement rules essentially about things like tobacco that the FTC does. The only card that I could find that explicitly advocates for FTC regulations that have nothing to do with Congress was a study about why we should take the same stuff we apply to tobacco advertising and apply it to sports gambling. So that might be the best solvency card on the topic. But also there's arguments out there that would just say the FTC establishing regulations would be because Congress told them to and gave them money to do so. So it could also look like targeting misleading advertisements by requiring detailed explanations of betting odds and prohibiting risk-free or no-sweat bet promotions. It could also look like displaying the problem gambling hotline number in advertisements, taxing every single bet, and using the money to enforce gambling laws and for gambling addiction services, setting a minimum age for sports betting, banning insider betting, as in not letting, coaches or players or owners bet, restricting when advertising of sports betting is allowed, like in time and where it's allowed, limiting the number of deposits that bettors are allowed to make per day, prohibiting betting via a credit card and not from, debit cards or from checking accounts, requiring affordability checks on people's accounts to let them keep gambling, or prohibiting prop betting, which is essentially betting on individual athletes' performances rather than just like win-loss records and things like that. So it could mean a whole bunch of different things. But this is public forum, so you're not supposed to read a plan. But what is a federal regulatory framework? Who knows? So what about similar topics to these from the past? Well, we've debated about Supreme Court cases and we've debated about gun laws before. In 2017, there was a topic about universal background checks for gun sales and transfers of ownership. In 2016, LD debated about banning the private ownership of handguns. In 2012, PF debated Congress should renew the federal assault weapons ban. In 2007, the private ownership of handguns should be banned in the United States was debated. And in 1990, government limits on the individual's right to bear arms in the United States are justified. So we have debated essentially the issue at hand of this Supreme Court case multiple times in the past. So next, what about the Federal Trade Commission should establish a federal regulatory framework for sports betting? It's pretty novel and new and unique to have a sports betting topic. We've debated things about sports and maybe about gambling in the past, but never together. In 2024, we debated in the United States, collegiate student athletes should be classified as employees of their educational institution. 2017, December, National Collegiate Athletic Association student athletes ought to be recognized as employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Kind of similar, it's about athletes. 2014, on balance, public subsidies for professional athletic organizations in the United States benefit their local communities. Are sports good for communities? Kind of relevant. And then in 2007, PF debated the cost of legalized casino gambling in the United States outweigh the benefits. So a topic about gambling. So what about simplicity of wording? The Supreme Court case is technically simple because it's just overturned this case and it's a relatively average length topic, but most people don't know what DC versus Heller is. Whereas the other topic is longer, slightly above average, and people don't really know what the Federal Trade Commission is or what a federal regulatory framework would be. Topic areas, these are both about democracy and governments. They're both about human rights and individual freedoms. The Supreme Court topic is about health and safety as well, and the sports betting topic is also about the arts, culture, and entertainment. So both of these are policy topics, but the first one doesn't actually tell us what policies would be adopted afterwards. What are cities and states going to do after it's overturned? We don't know. And the other one is also a policy topic, but we don't know what the federal regulatory framework would be, so it's mostly up to the pro. What do these topics look like at a first glance? Well, people won't know what the case is, and that will be enough for some people not to vote for the first topic entirely. But also, people will then look it up, see that it's a Supreme Court case about gun control, and then also, at first glance, not want anything to do with it. Whereas the other topic uses big words and feels complicated, but people at least understand mostly what the topic is about in a nutshell. How about easiness of research? The first one is actually pretty difficult to research because there's almost no recent evidence about this Supreme Court case. The last most recent card that I could find of someone advocating that this be overturned was an opinion article in like 2022. There are very few cards that actually call for this case to be overturned. There are plenty of cards even that do call for it to be overturned that admit that it probably wouldn't do very much. And it's really complicated to know what the effects of overturning this case would be on other cases, or even how cities or states would respond, to which there is almost no evidence on, again. Whereas it's pretty easy to research whether or not the federal government should regulate sports betting. The hard part is finding cards that are specific to the Federal Trade Commission regulating sports betting without a congressional mandate. Now, you can say that the FTC regulates when Congress tells them to do so, so voting pro normal means would mean that Congress tells them to do so, but that's harder to explain in a lay round in front of traditional coaches without sounding like you're reading a plan. So the regulate sports betting, easy. The mechanism/topic wording, difficult to research. What about cultural relevance? Unfortunately, recent shootings of firefighters in Idaho, of state politicians, of the Trump assassination attempt, the mass shootings that are happening, all of those always make gun control relevant, but this specific case is not necessarily super relevant at the moment. Sports betting, on the other hand, is really popular. Gambling addiction is on the rise. Sports are a huge part of American life. So those parts make it relevant, but the Federal Trade Commission is not super culturally relevant. Most people have never heard of it. What about appeal to youth? I think some kids will feel really uncomfortable debating the District of Columbia v. Heller topic, but gun control activist kids might feel really empowered to debate about it. I do think that the other topic will have a big appeal because it's about sports and gambling, and kids will think that it's fun to debate those things. But by the time you hit February, the number of kids who will only stay in debate if the topic is cool is usually minimized by now. How about partisanness or controversy? I think that it's an extremely controversial subject area on the District of Columbia v. Heller. The pro side is going to be seen as really liberal. The con side is going to be seen as really conservative. Whereas the sports betting topic is not very controversial or partisan. I guess the states' rights side of it is maybe the con's strongest argument, which is more of a conservative argument, but condemning gambling is also kind of a conservative argument. So not super partisan. In terms of educational value, I do think that the District of Columbia v. Heller topic is very valuable because helping kids understand the origin story and the timeline of how the Second Amendment was basically never interpreted to include an individual right to bear arms ever until 2008, but we pretend like the founders have always intended and the government has always intended for it to include an individual right to bear arms. So I think that it's probably good for unlearning some propaganda. But the other topic, I think, helps kids learn about the dangers of sports betting, which is really relevant to them, and how to stay away from it. And also, they'll understand, though, how sports betting, the people that do decide to do it, are kind of helping fund their state, most likely. Hell, maybe your debate program is actually getting money from the education system that is partially funded by the taxes on sports betting. What about bias? I think that there is a minimal con side bias on the overturning Columbia v. Heller because voting pro doesn't guarantee anything positive because you don't get to choose how cities and states respond, but it risks potential negatives, and the defense on the con is great because even most pro articles admit that the case didn't do as much as people thought it would. Whereas I think that on the Federal Trade Commission side, the SQO is objectively terrible, which helps the pro, but the topic wording is good for the con because it's difficult for the FTC to act on its own and hard to find evidence, but there's not as much good offense arguments for contentions on the con. How big are these topics? Well, the first topic is actually really small because very little changed post-Heller, and affirming could result in a bunch of different policy changes, I guess, but there's not a lot of evidence about what those would be. The impact variety is very small on the Columbia v. Heller topic. Whereas the FTC regulating sports betting topic is also pretty limited. Most of the arguments boil down to links about false advertising, revenue, and affordability. Most of the impacts on both sides are very similar to each other as well. What about lay and traditional debate friendliness? I think that the Columbia v. Heller is not lay friendly because the Supreme Court case process and overturning and the likely residual effects of that on the justice system are very complicated. There's a likelihood of a very strong bias for or against the topic by a lot of lay judges. But it's a policy topic that doesn't require you to read a plan, and the counterplans aren't great. So that helps the lay aspect of it. Whereas the FTC sports betting regulation topic is not very lay friendly either, but maybe more. It's vague enough that the pro probably has to explain how it would be regulated, but you can't read a plan. Judges could also be sports bettors themselves, so they could be biased as well. What about progressive debate friendliness? I think that the first topic could be prog debate friendly because of how many different policies could be passed, but you can really only defend those as examples topically. There's not great counterplans. It's okay on the critique level. Whereas the other topic could be decently progressive debate friendly. There's room for specification on how to regulate, but the lack of pro direct solvency advocates is difficult. There's okay counterplan ground and meh critique ground. I think that in terms of the reaction or bias about these, most topics about Supreme Court cases don't get picked. And I think that the unfortunate incident at Nationals during the HI finals will make people hesitant to debate about anything with potential gun violence. I think that whereas some people are worried about debating the regulatory framework on sports betting topic in front of lay judges, but if you're worried about lay judges, I don't see a world where it's easier to argue Columbia v. Heller in front of most lay judges. Also, some kids online seem to think that it'd be funny to debate sports gambling, and there's like a casino KF, I guess. So, point being, I think that the bias and reaction will not be super positive for either of these, but it's more likely to be less negative about sports betting. What can you argue on the pro and the con of overturning the DC versus Heller topic? Well, arguments for why the Supreme Court should overturn it would be restoring jurisprudence or respecting historical interpretations of the Constitution, respecting state and local government rights, reducing gun suicide deaths from handguns in the home, reducing mass shootings, reducing homicides, reducing court clog, making police officers safer, decreasing the risk of accidental gun death, reducing domestic violence, and reducing domestic terrorism. Whereas the con can argue that overturning this case is bad because it would undermine self-defense. It could swing the midterm elections for conservatives. It would eliminate the dangerous and unusual weapons limitation that Heller established, which could actually make it harder to give justification to states and cities to ban certain types of guns. It would hurt the weapons industry, which is an argument I hate, but it's one of the ones you could make. It would increase black market activity. That enforcement of these laws will be disproportionate or inequitable. Whatever the laws regulating handguns that are passed will be targeted against, black and brown people. It will weaken stare decisis, or the stability of Supreme Court interpretations and law. It will increase the number of legal battles over new gun laws while making it, more difficult to resolve them because the existing case law will now no longer be clear. It will disrupt hunting, possibly, and make hunters' lives harder. And it will possibly create such a big backlash that there will be a even more pro-gun constitutional amendment called for. What about the FTC regulating sports betting topic? 10 ideas for pro arguments would be protecting players and coaches from violence, increasing gambling addiction services funding and access, fighting predatory and false advertising of sports betting, reducing financial risks by putting a ceiling on bets, eliminating prop betting to protect athletes, preserving sports integrity or stopping insider betting, addressing state law inconsistency and circumvention, combating market consolidation, reducing fraud, and preventing underage gambling. The con, on the other hand, could talk about violating federalism, reducing revenues for state governments. There could be a overstretching or overworking the FTC disadvantage style argument, a court clog or increasing lawsuits over the regulations disadvantage, increasing black market betting, increasing lobbying by the pro-gaming gambling industry, chilling innovation, decreasing sports viewership and attendance, increasing compliance and operating costs, which would be passed on to consumers, and discouraging a congressional response, because if the FTC's got it, then why would we need a law? So what do I think is going to win? I think that sports betting is going to win because specific Supreme Court case topics are very rarely picked. In the past couple of years, whenever one has come up, I don't think that it's pretty much ever been picked. I think that people who vote without researching won't pick that one, and even people who do like one Google search won't pick that one because they don't want to debate gun control, and I think lay circuits won't want to debate gun control. If DC v. Heller does win, it will because it's the shorter topic, it doesn't really require a plan, and it will require less overall work to prep most arguments on the topic. But I'm still giving about 70-30 odds to sports betting. I will be shocked if Columbia v. Heller gets picked. I also think sports betting should win because even though it's not the perfect topic, I think it lacks variety in arguments for the con. It's still more balanced and less partisan and controversial than DC v. Heller is. I don't like that voting pro isn't guaranteed to actually do anything. I don't like that almost nobody is advocating for overturning DC v. Heller, and I don't like that there's pretty much zero cards advocating for or announcing what cities and states would even do if it was overturned. So I just don't like the DC v. Heller topic for the pro at all, which when the pro is bad, it can make the con worse too, because if the pro doesn't have a stable, predictable ground for what they're defending, then it makes it easier for them to skirt con offense. At least the sports betting topic has cards about federal regulation being good or bad, even if it's not specific to the FTC doing that regulation being good or bad. So I would give the DC v. Heller topic a 6 out of 10 at best, and the sports betting topic a 7.5 out of 10 because of the FTC. I think that if it was Congress instead, it would be an 8.5 out of 10. All right, second to last cycle that we will be talking about in this video is March. Both of these topics are about single-family housing. It is probably the most seemingly specific and similar topic ballot choices that I've ever seen. But it's interesting because I thought, well, no matter what you vote for, the debate's going to be the same. But really, both debates are going to be very different, even though they're both about single-family housing. So single-family residences, from the first topic, the United States federal government should ban corporate acquisition of single-family residences. What is a single-family residence? It is a standalone, quote-unquote, housing structure designed to be occupied by one household or kinship group built on its own parcel of land. Most likely, from a lot of stuff that I've seen, it includes townhomes, but not always. It probably doesn't include duplexes and triplexes, and it most likely does not include condos or condominiums. What is the corporate acquisition of single-family residences? Well, it's private companies buying, owning, renting, and or selling the homes. It's not the same necessarily, but could be, as mom and pop landlord ownership of homes, which is usually like, people who just buy 10 or less properties that they manage themselves and it's not an official company. And what does it mean to ban this? Well, it could mean, and it most likely just means that you can't buy new homes. You can't buy homes from families if you're a company, and you can't buy homes from other companies if you're a company. But you can keep the ones that you have, because acquisition is the process of acquiring something new. Maybe, possibly, if you find a good definition of acquisition that's in context in the literature, it could force corporations to sell the single-family residences that they own now, but most likely it just means every corporate-owned home stays a corporate-owned home unless they decide to sell it to a family. It just means that current homes not owned by companies cannot become owned by companies. So families have to sell to other families, and companies have to sell to families, not to other companies. Or they could just keep renting them. However, there is a question of, is it acquisition if a company acquires land and then pays to have a house built on it? They did not acquire that home, they built and own that home, and maybe they could still sell those homes to families, but at least they wouldn't be able to sell those new homes to other companies. So yeah, the second option is state governments in the United States should eliminate exclusive single-family zoning. Now, what is zoning? It is the legal classification of territory to determine what types of property and or land development is allowed in that area. This typically includes types of zoning, could be residential types of zoning, commercial types of zoning, industrial types of zoning, agricultural types of zoning, and historic types of zoning. Each of those has many different subcategories underneath it. So what is exclusive single-family zoning? Well, it differs from state to state and from locale to locale, which is probably why this is a state government's actor topic, but it is the legal classification of segments of territory to only allow land development or property building for the building of exclusive standalone housing structures designed only to be occupied by one household or kinship group built on their own parcels of land. But that differs from state to state and from city to city. Single-family zoning usually doesn't include condos or apartments. It rarely includes duplexes, and it sometimes includes townhomes and accessory dwelling units. Eliminating single-family zoning would not mean that we just blow up all of the zones. It would mean that they have to become a new type of zone. So most likely, it would at the very least require that things that currently only allow for single-family homes would have to at least allow for accessory dwelling units, townhomes, and duplexes. So these topics are very similar to each other in terms of what previous topics they are similar to. They're different enough to change what the debates are going to be about, which I think is really cool because it guarantees that kids are learning about something no matter what topic we pick, but that there's enough choice in the ballot for whatever we want to debate about. You don't have to debate about one thing necessarily if the other topic gets picked. So what is this similar to? Well, round 1 and 2 this year at NSDA Nationals in World Schools debate, the topic was "This House regrets the commercialization of single-family homes," which, spoiler alert, I think is a much better topic than either of these. I think that either of these topics, if they were instead benefits versus harms topics, would be better, because the hardest part of these discussions is the policy of what do we do about it. And he didn't really have to say what would we do about it now on the World Schools motion. You could say, I just wish we wouldn't have done this in the first place. In September, October of 2023, we debated the United States ought to guarantee the right to housing. In March of 2019, we debated the United States should promote the development of market rate housing in urban neighborhoods. And in March, April of 2017 in LD, there was a debate on the United States ought to guarantee the right to housing as well. The September, October 2023 was also from Lincoln Douglas debate. So in terms of wording simplicity or length, these are both pretty average length topics, but on the first one, the words acquisition and residences are unclear and up for debate, and people might not know necessarily what they mean. Whereas the other topic is pretty simple, but exclusive single-family zoning is a term of art that some people might not know. So the topic areas for both of these are housing, economic rights, and inequality. The types of wording for both of these are policy topics, but neither necessarily requires a plan. The first one, if acquisition is only can't buy homes as a company anymore, but you can keep the ones you already have and you can still build and sell and rent new ones, then it really doesn't make a big change. Whereas the other policy topic also does not require a plan, but it's not necessarily clear what happens to the single family zoning that already exists. It definitely means that new developments, new zones could not be named single family zoning, but it probably means that exclusive single family zones have to become something else. But it could be they have to allow all types of residences to be built, or even allow companies or businesses to be built in those areas, or at the least smallest change, it just means that you have to allow multifamily housing units. So duplexes, townhomes, and condos, maybe not full-on apartment complexes yet. So at a first glance, what counts as a single family home, or what single family zoning is complicated because it changes from state to state. And people will also assume that acquisition is the same thing as ownership on the first topic, but it's not. I think that the single family zoning topic is easier to understand at a first glance. What about research? Great research on the status quo being good or bad for both of these, which is why they should have been benefits versus harms topics, in my opinion. But the actual topic wording of the ban corporate acquisition of single-family residences is very hard to research because of how minuscule the change would actually be. There are laws that have advocated for just preventing future acquisition, but most of the articles that are being written and the studies that are being done are about why it is bad for the current ownership of homes by companies should be changed or is harmful. Not just keep everything that's currently happening the same, but make it so that you can't in the future have more corporate ownership. There's not a lot of evidence out there that the percentage of homes being owned by corporations is increasing. Basically every single year, anywhere from 15 to, at most in some states, 33% of homes are owned by corporations and sold by corporations, but there's not any evidence that I can find that says corporations are selling to other corporations, or that families are selling really often to corporations. So the ease of research, on the other hand, is probably better for the pro on eliminating single-family zoning, but it's hard to research the specific problems or solutions that would be happening or be necessary in each state. The cultural relevance of both of these topics, housing affordability, is always going to be relevant to kids and to judges and coaches, unfortunately. And in terms of youth appeal, I think that both of these will be kind of boring for underclassmen, but it will be interesting to upperclassmen thinking about moving out and unfortunately learning about how horrible the future of their likely housing situation is. Both of these are not super politically charged. The pro is more liberal, the con is more conservative. Some judges, if they have personal experience with the topic subjects, will be more biased than others. So if you have a mom and pop landlord as a judge, or if you have a renter as a judge on the first topic, they'll probably have an opinion going in. Or if you get judges that live, or kids that live in single family exclusive zones, they'll probably have a strong opinion, but others might not. Both of the topics are pretty educational. I think the first one will help kids understand the home buying versus renting process, and the opportunities and challenges that are going to be available to them in the future. And it will help them be more informed voters on both topics. And I think that state and local issues that are affecting kids right now, they'll learn about more on the second topic. and it will make them more informed voters, and it can help unlearn some misconceptions that kids might have and judges and adults might have about single-family zoning. So what about side bias? I think that the offense on the first topic is pro-biased, but the defense is con-biased. The pro probably at best solves 2 to 3 small impacts and probably only risks 1 or 2 small impacts. The other topic is pretty balanced. There's things that make it skewed for the con and things that make it skewed for the pro. Homeowner judges will be very con biased most likely, but defense also goes con. But the offense on con is not great for why single family zoning is good or should stay. The size of the topic is extremely small on the first one, like extremely small. You're only banning companies from buying more homes. You're not affecting any of the homes that they already own, and they probably are still allowed to build new ones. They just can't acquire existing homes to then sell or rent, and there's very little literature specific to just that proposal. Most literature is attacking overall corporate ownership, not attacking the ability for homes to continue buying or companies to continue buying homes in the future. And the size of the other topic is also pretty small. The problem is just knowing what would the zones convert to: full residential, just allowing townhomes and duplexes. Also, you got to know what each individual state is going to do or already does. The first topic is not super lay friendly because of the word acquisition, likely leading to some topicality framing debates that are hard to explain in 4 minutes, even to non-lay judges. But the topic itself is very relevant to lay judges, which is nice. Whereas the other topic, lay judges are likely already biased on the topic, but it's a policy topic that doesn't require a plan, which helps for lay debate and traditional debate. For progressive or, LARPing or K-friendly debate, I think that being pro is really hard on the single-family residences topic because of bad evidence and a lack of flexibility. There's decent critique ground on capitalism for both sides, but the counterplan ground is meh. On the other topic, I think that it's decent for prog debaters. The pro can defend what the zoning would change to without getting into plan territory. Counterplans can probably prohibit only new single-family zones, but allow current single-family zones to stay the same, is vague enough that you can probably get away with it and a good argument. And I think that the critique ground is decent on both sides. For community bias or reaction, I think that the first topic seems simple, more simple than the other, even though it's not. It is popular on Discord for some reason, and it is a repeat suggestion, so the PF topic committee seems to really like it. Whereas on the other topic, there are some people excited about single-family zoning online. Some people are worried about it because their parents didn't love it when they brought it up to them, and it is currently losing the poll by quite a lot. So in terms of arguments that are specific to the word acquisition, I could only find 5 arguments that I think you'll be able to have a shot at finding evidence for. And even these ones, the evidence is not great. The pro could talk about more availability of single-family homes, because if every time that someone goes to sell it, only a family can buy it instead of a company buying it, hypothetically speaking, it means that there are more homes available for purchase by families. Maybe the homes that are being sold are more affordable because companies have more money than families do and can offer cash in high amounts immediately, which families can't outbid. So if that doesn't happen anymore, maybe the homes that are up for sale are more affordable. Renting might get cheaper because there's some evidence that says mom and pop landlords have cheaper rent than corporate owned housing does, but they can still rent the homes they already own, so that argument doesn't super work. You can have the neighborhood unity will be better, or community stability will be better if it's bought and owned by people. People probably won't sell their homes to just people they don't think will, be good for the neighborhood or fit in with the neighborhood, or, corporations don't really care as much about neighborhoods, would be this argument. And there's some stuff that says that corporate landlords evict more often, and evictions are super harmful than mom and pop landlords do, or than just regular homeowners do. Con arguments that you could read that are, again, specific to future acquisition of homes by companies would be that if you ban that, it will hurt corporate real estate companies, which means that they will build fewer homes, which is bad for housing availability. That it will harm the stock market or the overall value of those real estate corporations, which is bad for the overall economy. that it will slow down home sales for buyers who need to sell fast. If you have a new job offer and you've got to get out of there as soon as possible, it's usually faster to sell your home to a company because of their high cash flow abilities. There's arguments that when companies buy homes, it improves the quality of housing because they renovate those homes, they flip those homes and make them nicer for the people who live there later, or that renters, corporate landlords might take better care of homes that they rent than mom and pop landlords do. And there's also something that says that if the market ever gets shocked again and housing prices are going to stumble, that it is good for corporations to have the ability to buy homes, even though 2008 is the reason why all these companies own homes now and a big reason why the housing crisis is bad. One last thing, there's a lot of articles out there that are saying that corporations can't be to blame for housing prices because they only own X percentage of homes. But if they set the standard for what the pricing is, and if they drive prices up so that everyone else has to meet them, then they are a big part of the problem. The truth is, corporate ownership of single-family homes is to blame for a lot of the problems. This topic, however, does not get rid of corporate ownership of homes. It only prevents corporations from buying even more homes than they already own, but that means that the onus is on the pro to prove that the percentage of home buying by corporations versus by families is increasing to the point where the percentage is the amount of homes owned by corporations, bought by corporations, is meaningfully increasing compared to like in the past couple of years than it has just over the past since 2008. And I think that will be difficult. Whereas on the eliminating single family zoning topic, again, small topic, but I could come up with more stuff based on my research. You can say as the pro that we should eliminate single-family zoning because it will increase the supply of higher density housing, that it will promote socioeconomic diversity in neighborhoods, that it will help challenge or eliminate historical racism and classism, that it will increase access to high-quality social services, that it is better for the environment, that it will benefit local businesses, that it will reduce the cost of infrastructure, and that it will improve public health. Con arguments for why we should not eliminate single-family zoning would include that it will increase road congestion and parking difficulties, it will strain local infrastructure from the massive influx of people moving to certain areas, that it will reduce the property values of current homeowners, it will result in a loss of green space or outdoor space in neighborhoods, reduced peace and quiet and privacy in neighborhoods, violating local control at the state level, that it will result in court clog or legal challenges to the new zones, and then it increases the risk of gentrification. So what do I think is going to win? Unfortunately, I think that corporate acquisition is going to win because it seems like the simpler topic. It's been suggested multiple times. It's gotten more attention or blame in the media and just in our culture for housing affordability than zoning has, and it was a world schools motion recently. The problem is all of those things make it seem like the topic would be better, but the wording is not actually about those things. I also think that however people react to the state government actor topic from earlier in the season will affect whether or not this one gets picked. If people vote for the state government's actor topic earlier in the season and they like having state governments as the actor, then that will work in single-family zoning's favor. If they don't, then it will work against it. So I'm currently giving corporate acquisition 55-45 odds, but I really hope that I'm wrong. Because if I was the only person deciding, I would definitely pick the eliminating exclusive single-family zoning topic. I think the corporate acquisition topic is way too small and limited in ground evidence and actual likely effects. I think that most rounds will devolve into one of three things: bad framing debates, terminal defense that reduces both sides' impacts to near zero, or really contrived link chains to make it seem like the topic is bigger than it is. I think the zoning topic, on the other hand, is still limited in its scope, but has much better solvency advocates, has a greater likelihood of reasonable to medium large-sized impacts on both sides, and it has fewer bad framing or definition debates that are guaranteed to happen on it. I would give the corporate acquisition topic a 6 out of 10. If it was a ownership topic that was a benefits versus harms topic, or even just banning ownership, I would probably give this a 9 out of 10. And I would give the zoning topic an 8.5 out of 10. We have come to the final topic cycle in this video. I'll have to do a follow-up video on the potential topic options for nationals later on this year. But the first option for the April 2026 cycle, which is about federal power, is the United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in low Earth orbit satellite networks, which sounds like a topic straight out of policy debate. What is a low Earth orbit satellite network? It is a system of interconnected objects launched into space up to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface that facilitates communication and data transmission across an area. It is also used in places where cables aren't practical or usable for getting internet and cell phone communications, like on ships, in mines, in extremely remote areas, etc. What would it mean to increase our investment substantially? I don't know, because we're already spending billions of dollars on this. And there's evidence from as soon as today talking about how we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this exact thing. So I don't know how much exactly an increase that is substantial in investment would look like. And I think that luckily this topic is so far away that hopefully the evidence that tells us what the inherency is and what the proposed increase would be will come up within the next 9-ish months. So the other option is the United States should eliminate the president's authority to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. So what is that authority to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval? Well, the president is the commander-in-chief. They cannot declare war, but they can deploy troops in a place that we have not declared war for up to 90 days, including 30 days of withdrawal time, without congressional approval, but within 48 hours must provide notice in order to respond to attacks and other emergencies and or to carry out and implement treaty agreements. That is when the president is quote unquote allowed to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. There are over 200 examples of this, including Korea by Truman in 1950, the Dominican Republic by Johnson in 1965, Lebanon and Grenada by Reagan in 1983, Panama by Bush in 1989, Kosovo by Clinton in 1999, Libya by Obama in 2011, Syria by Trump in 2018, Iraq by Trump in 2020, and again Iran by Trump in 2025, although there are some people saying that it wasn't technically deploying military forces, it was deploying military force because there weren't boots on the ground. So what topics have we debated similar to these? For the first option of the United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in low Earth orbit satellite networks. In 2022, in LD, they debated the appropriation of outer space by private entities as unjust. In March of 2021, they debated on balance the benefits of creating the United States Space Force outweigh the harms. And in October of 2011, private sector investment in human space exploration is preferable to public sector investment was debated. Then we've got the other topic, the United States should eliminate the president's authority to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. We've debated kind of similar topics in the past. In 2025, this year at Nationals, we debated on balance in the United States, the benefits of presidential executive orders outweigh the harms. So presidential power responding to emergencies, similar arguments. March 2018, the debate was on balance, the current authorization for use of military force gives too much power to the president. So a very similar topic, and there will definitely be relevant briefs, although the cards will be 8 years old. And then in 2013, unilateral military force by the United States is justified to prevent nuclear proliferation. Similar because it's the number one justification for why Trump struck Iran. So what about the wording simplicity of these? Well, both of these are not necessarily simple, and both of them are above average in length. They're both 16 words long, which is very long for a PF topic. Most people don't know what a low Earth orbit satellite network is, but they might be able to guess. And most people don't necessarily know what the exact authority of deploying military forces abroad without congressional approval is, but it's pretty simple and clear as a topic overall, although what or how the power is eliminated. Is it a Supreme Court reinterpretation of a article of the Constitution? Is it a congressional law revoking the War Powers Act? We don't really know. But it is something that basically allows us to fiat that Trump will not ignore whatever the decision is. So topic areas, both of these are about military and security, but the first one is about science and technology, and the second one is also about democracy and governance. Both of these are policy topics that don't leave much room for plans or require you to read a plan. Both of them look they're both policy topics, but the first one looks a lot more like a policy debate format topic, and people won't really know why we need low Earth orbit satellite networks from the jump. The other topic actually looks more like an LD topic if you replaced should with ought to, but it's pretty much easier to understand from the jump than the other topic is. So how about ease of research? It's very easy to research the benefits and mostly easy to research the harms of low Earth orbit satellite networks, but finding inherency that says we specifically need more investment, let alone substantially more investment, is hard to find because the private sector is already doing so much and the federal government is already spending so much money investing in private development of low Earth orbit satellite networks. The other topic is also pretty easy to research. Almost all of the recent evidence, however, goes pro, but it's more balanced if you find research from pre-June of 2025. Luckily, you don't need as much like recent research to like prove or disprove in principle the second topic. In terms of cultural relevance, internet connectivity is obviously always relevant because you are watching this via the internet, and debate is reliant on the internet, but the exact topic of low Earth orbit satellite networks is not necessarily super relevant. And then the cultural relevance of the other topic is pretty relevant right now due to Iran, and unfortunately will probably stay that way thanks to Trump. For youth appeal, I think that both of these topics are kind of boring. The first one will be more interesting to kids that are invested in space, but it has some cool arguments. And the second topic, kids that are thinking about joining the military and more politically minded or involved kids will love the topic. For partisanness, the low Earth orbit satellite networks topic is not politically charged, but I'd say the pro is more conservative and the con is more liberal, but you don't have to argue it that way. There are liberal and conservative arguments on both sides of the topic. Whereas the other topic about deploying forces is very politically charged thanks to Donald Trump. The pro is more liberal and the con is more conservative, but that wasn't always the case. And there are definitely liberals who are pro-war. So I guess maybe pro is more left, could be more leftist or liberal. Con could be more conservative or liberal. The educational value of both of these topics is there. I think that the first one is unique, but it's not necessarily very applicable to most students. There is a definite lack of inherency, and it's probably going to happen no matter what the outcome of the topic is. So kids might learn about why investing in low Earth orbit satellite networks is bad, but we're going to do it anyways. So I don't know how valid the knowledge is. Whereas I think the other topic is very valuable education. Learning about government authority improves the accountability of the public and it makes kids more informed voters. So what about side skew? I would say that the comparative advantage, a world where if we're just comparing benefits versus harms, is pretty balanced or even pro-biased. But the fact that there is zero inherency or that there will already be solvency or alternatives to solvency for low Earth orbit satellite networks, whether we increase investment or not, is very much con biased. Whereas the deploying military forces without approval topic is pretty pro-biased amongst debaters and recent evidence, but the con has good points that they can make as well, and who knows what will happen in the future. If we end up getting in a war and countries are joining in left and right, or America gets attacked randomly out of nowhere, then maybe the topic will swing to be more pro or con biased, I would say that the first topic is medium to large sized and has a lot of ground on both sides for the low Earth orbit satellite networks, whereas the other topic is small to medium sized with similar arguments being made by both sides. There's not a lot of variety. So the lay friendliness or traditional debate friendliness of both. You don't have to have strong biases. It's unlikely that you encounter those in the first topic. You don't need a plan per se, and there's good defensive arguments, which is good for lay debate. Whereas on the congressional approval topic, you are very likely to encounter strong biases. You are very likely to have to debate war impacts, and it's going to be very time sensitive. Whatever recent events have happened in the news are going to swing the topic pro or con. For progressive or LARPing friendly K-debate, I think that the first topic is pretty prog friendly. There's a potential for huge impacts on both sides. There's decent counterplan ground. There's meh K ground on the pro, but there's decent K ground on the con. Whereas on the authority to deploy topic, it's pretty progressive friendly with big impacts. The counterplans are just okay. There's good critique ground on the pro, and there's meh critique ground on the con. For community bias or reactions to these topics, I think that most people online are pushing for the low Earth orbit satellite networks topic, but they are starting to notice the lack of inherency, but the topic is more exciting or novel, I think. Whereas the presidential authority to deploy forces without congressional approval, I think that people are worried about neg ground, and the only reason that I think people will really be biased towards it maybe is that it is like recency bias, that it is, if PF is supposed to be about current events, this feels more like it's about current events than the low Earth orbit satellite networks topic is. So what about argument ideas for both sides? Here are 10 pro arguments for why we should substantially increase our investment in low Earth orbit satellite networks. That it will help expand internet access to rural, remote, or underserved populations, that it will improve the security of military communications, that it will increase economic growth, that it will save money compared to other satellite orbit levels, that it will improve emergency response times, that it will maintain global leadership of satellites in space over China, that it will improve productivity across the economy, it will improve climate and weather monitoring, that it will create technology jobs, and it will facilitate autonomous transportation vehicle safety. The con, on the other hand, can say that we should not substantially increase low Earth orbit satellite networks because it will result in increased space debris, that it will cause orbital overcrowding or collisions of satellites, that it will increase pollution, that it will cause international conflict over the regulations or lack thereof of these satellite networks, that supporting big tech is bad, and the only way to really increase investment in this is to support big tech, that it will trade off with broadband infrastructure of internet, which is better, that it will harm physical security of the satellites, that they're easier to attack or shoot down, that it will trade off with spending on other priorities, because this is probably just going to increase our military spending unnecessarily, that it will cause vulnerabilities in the supply chain because the materials needed to build these we can't just only get from ourselves, and that there are more likely going to be cyber attacks against these satellites. What about the military force deployment topic? 10 pro arguments for why we should not be allowed to have the president deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval, that doing so will reduce the risk of war or escalation of conflict, that it will strengthen the US's international legitimacy, improve the quality of decision-making over war because everyone in Congress has to kind of get together to decide versus one person, that it will protect U.S. troops, that it will rein in executive power overall, that it will improve the transparency and accountability of war and war-making efforts, that it will increase the likelihood that the president uses diplomacy instead, that it will avoid military overextension or overreach in multiple places, that it will improve public trust in the government and avoid civil unrest, that it avoids improperly budgeted military spending. The con, on the other hand, can say that we should not eliminate the president's ability to deploy forces abroad without congressional approval, that presidents are speedy and efficient in times of crisis and emergency, that polarization and gridlock makes congressional approval unlikely even when it's a good idea or necessary, that it will weaken our deterrence capability or embolden our enemies to feel like they are more likely to be able to attack us without consequence or attack us and get the upper hand, that it prohibits or inhibits our ability to protect U.S. citizens abroad, that it is upsetting or worrying allies that will need U.S. protection to believe that maybe Congress won't protect them the same way that the president would quickly, that it violates the Constitution by taking away the president's authority, although the pro could just argue that the way the U.S. would change the power is by changing the Constitution. Congress lacks the same intelligence as the president, so they can't make as good or informed of decisions, that it will weaken covert or special operations effectiveness if Congress has to publicly debate about it or give their approval, that it will limit the likelihood or speediness or effectiveness of humanitarian intervention in instances of genocide or natural disaster, and that perhaps that it will allow for conflicts to escalate rather than being swiftly dealt with, that we could nip it in the bud with quick presidential action, but the amount of time that it would take for Congress to act would allow it to escalate. So what do I think is going to win? I think that deploying forces is going to win because it feels less like a policy debate topic. It is unfortunately more relevant, and people won't know what low Earth orbital satellite networks are. But because it is the Tournament of Champions topic, and I think the progressive debate community will push for satellites, I'm only giving deploy forces about a 5% higher likelihood, technically 10%, I guess, 55-45 odds. So the United States should eliminate president's authority to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval. I don't dislike it as a topic per se. What I will vote for is very much going to depend on the next 9 months of news. I'm hoping that the news means that I will vote for satellites. If we get into a war with another country, or if we get attacked by another country, being pro will become much harder or much easier, depending on how everything works, on deploying forces abroad. As of right now, I think it's an 8 out of 10 topic. If we continue to increase our spending on low Earth orbital satellite networks over the next 9 months, I think that inherency will make being pro way too difficult. So if somehow we get inherency evidence, for example, a lot of our contracts on low Earth orbital satellite networks are with SpaceX or with companies that Elon Musk is involved in. So if Trump decides to pull those back because he and Musk are beefing, then the inherency will get a lot better for this. In which case, I think that this is an 8.5 out of 10 topic, and I will vote for it. But if it is very clear that we are already giving billions and millions of dollars to this topic as a policy debate topic and a former policy debater, there's no inherency. I don't think this topic is as good, so I will vote for the congressional approval to deploy forces. So here is my kind of finalized-ish ballot for how I will be voting, and you are allowed to make your own decision, but if you trust all of my recommendations, this is what I would recommend voting for. In September and October, I would vote for nuclear sharing. In November, December, government power, I would vote for state governments ending judicial elections. In January, I would vote for the African Continental Free Trade Area. In February, I would vote for the FTC establishing a federal regulatory framework for sports betting. In March of 2026, I would vote for state governments should eliminate exclusive single-family zoning. And in April, I think that we should really base our votes based off of the research. I will tell you maybe when I release my video about the potential nationals topics, which April topic I would recommend voting for if it hasn't already been announced. I think that if there is any good inherency evidence at all, and if there is evidence specific for solvency of we need more money, then I think that I will vote for the low Earth orbit satellite networks. If it was a benefits versus harms topic, no questions asked, I would vote for the orbital networks. But if there's no one actually saying we need more money, and if there's a bunch of evidence saying that we're already giving a ton of money, then I will be voting for the presidential authority to deploy military forces abroad without congressional approval being eliminated topic. So what are my thoughts on the overall PF topics? If you've made it this far, congratulations and thank you. What do I like about these topics? First, before I get into this, thank you to the PF Topic Wording Committee. You do a lot of thankless work, and I think that there's a lot of good stuff going on here. I think that pretty much every topic, at the very least, has good evidence for why the status quo is bad, but also good evidence for why the status quo might be justified or not that bad, which is a good stasis point for debate. I think many of the topics don't require the pro to read a plan, even though they're a policy topic, which is good, and it allows for flexibility in interpretation of what it means to vote pro, or that you can give examples to justify your case, which I think is good. I think a lot of the topics are relevant to current events and will reward kids for staying on top of the news over the next full season. I think that the topic areas aren't very repetitive of each other, and the debates won't be getting stale from cycle to cycle, which is really nice. I wish I could say that for LD. The topic areas are also very unique compared to the past few years of PF topics for the most part, so those are all good things. What am I not as big of a fan of these topics? I think that the topics feel made up. I think that they're not actually rooted in the literature for solvency advocates on the pro of actually saying we should do this thing. I understand wanting policy topics, but if you pick a specific policy or even a vague policy area, there needs to be people in the literature saying we should do this exact thing. Otherwise, it is too hard to be pro, and in some ways it's too hard to have specific good pro arguments, and it's too hard to have specific good con arguments. Because if nobody's saying we should do X, then there's definitely not going to be people writing articles about why we should not do X. Second, I think that there are too many policy topics. There are 11 out of the 12 options this year are policy topics. There is only one evaluative or comparative topics, which gives a massive disproportionate preference and advantage to progressive debaters in the PF community when the majority of the community is not that. It is traditional debaters competing in front of lay judges. They just might not be as involved in the summertime or in the topic writing processes, which, to be fair, hey, traditional debaters, you can't really complain about the topics if you refuse to write any or give any suggestions or even try to get on the committee. Third of all, a lot of the policy topics are so vague that in order to get any solvency, and in order to not just have every con argument ever be, well, we don't actually have to defend that, the pro basically has to specify enough that they are going to be at risk of being accused of reading a plan. So I don't really love that. And I think that the topics don't really deal with the most pressing issues that are actually affecting quality of life in America right now, which on the one hand is hard to write topics about because of Trump and because of political polarization and not wanting to have topics be too biased or controversial. But I wish that these felt more relevant to our daily lives. And I feel like the LD topics felt more relevant this year, which is weird. So, what are my recommendations after saying thank you and saying that I am not a member of the committee? I don't know how much hard work that is, and so they are allowed to say you're not on the committee. If you want these recommendations to happen, get on it. I've tried. But here are my recommendations for the PF topic committee in the future. Please try and have a balance of topics that are policy and value and fact. I don't mean every cycle should have one policy option and one value fact option, because that means that people are voting based on their preferred structure instead of the content area, which I think is bad. Instead, I think that there should be at least 2 of the 7 cycles a year that are 2 policy topics, and at least 2 of the 7 cycles a year that are not policy topics. Because then everybody gets to debate at least a few topics a year that definitely cater to their preferred style of debate, and that they will have to learn how to debate under the other side's preferred style. Also, please try and guarantee that every policy topic has multiple solvency advocates, or that the topic wording that you used is actually what is being advocated for in recent literature and academia and the news. That means that there will be better ground and stable, predictable ground and higher quality evidence and less power tagging for both sides. I also think that we need to continue to have non-USFG actor resolutions, so international topics and state and local government topics. I should have added that as a thing I really liked about the topics this year. In an era of the federal government being a total flop, from Congress passing the big beautiful bill to the Supreme Court being a 6-3 supermajority for the conservatives to Donald Trump being Donald Trump, I think that any topics that can get around the federal government being terrible are good. When the literature is mostly about a disagreement over whether or not things are good right now, not a disagreement over whether or not a policy or solution should be adopted, it doesn't need to be a policy topic. We can debate about the effects of policy choices that have been made without having to debate about the merits of changing them, if that debate is not going to be good. So there are a lot of topics this year that would have been better if the exact issue would have just been phrased as a benefits versus harms, or as a does more harm than good type of situation. Fifth, please try to write resolutions that are specific enough that they don't require the pro to nearly violate the rules by reading a plan to get any solvency, or to make sure that the literature matches up with what they're saying, or to make it possible for the pro to say, we don't actually defend that, to get out of con offense. So whenever it's a policy topic, it should not look like a policy debate topic that is so vague that the pro needs to read a plan, or that they can simply say, oh, but we're not defending that part of the topic. Otherwise, the con will lose their ground. Sixth, please make sure that the action words in policy topics are well rooted in the literature and easily defined, to avoid likely framework and topicality debates that don't work well in public forum because of how short the speech times are. And seventh, please consider releasing synopses or analyses of the topics alongside the initial release of those topics, or during the voting periods, to help people understand sort of the framer's intent, and what the starting point is for understanding those topics, so that the debates can just be about the arguments and not about trying to make sense of resolutions that are hard to make sense of. So with that, once again, thank you so much to the topic committee for all of the work that you do, and please continue to do what you do. That is it for this video, breaking down the 2025 to 2026 potential public forum debate resolutions. I hope that you will return to this video throughout the season to make decisions about the topics. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you completely disagree with me, tell me how and why. We'll see if I end up having my predictions be correct, or if the topics that I hope win. But with that being said, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.